Stand at the back, Eleanor. A wolf without a scent has no place in the front of the moon's gaze. The elder's voice was as cold as the winter sleet. Around me, the other Omegas shimmered in silk and lavender, their wolves humming with the promise of a mate. I looked at my hands, stained with the flour of the kitchens, where I was hidden like a shameful secret. My pale hair was my only veil. For 22 years, I was the ghost of the pack, unseen, unwanted, and labeled defective, awaiting a fate of exile in the frozen borderlands. The ancient stone walls of the Silver Moon Pack House always felt colder on the night of the great choosing. It was a night of destiny for most, a night where the celestial alignment promised the union of alphas and omegas. But for me, it was a countdown to erasure. In our world, an omega's worth was measured by the sweetness of their scent and the vibrancy of their inner wolf. I possessed neither. I was a hollow, a term whispered behind kitchen doors. I could knead bread until my knuckles bled, and I could tend to the fires until my skin smelled of ash. But I could not shift. I could not signal to a mate that I was here. "You're doing it again, Ellie," a soft voice chided. I looked up from the wooden table. Malene, the only woman who had looked at me with love since my mother passed, stood there with a simple white dress draped over her arm. Her eyes were full of a sorrow she tried to hide. "I'm just making sure there's enough sourdough for the feast, Malene. People get hungry after they find their souls," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The feast can wait. You are 22. This is your final choosing. If you aren't claimed tonight." She couldn't finish the sentence. We both knew the law. Unclaimed Omegas were sent to the borderlands, a desolate strip of land between territories, to serve as laborers until their spirits faded. It was a life of quiet, lonely survival. "I am a defective Omega, Malene. Even the lowliest alpha won't look at a girl who smells of wet ashes and flour," I whispered. I reached up to touch the silver pendant at my throat, a crescent moon etched with tiny, worn runes. It was my mother's last gift. "Remember, little one," she had whispered. "Even in darkness, the moon never truly disappears." Malene sighed, stepping forward to pull the flour-dusted apron from my waist. "You are not defective. You are just quiet. Now, wash. The king's delegates have arrived, and they say the atmosphere in the grove is unlike anything we've seen in a century." "The king?" I froze. "Why would the Alpha King send delegates to a common pack like ours?" "They say he is searching for something," Malene whispered, her voice trembling. "Something that was lost." The sacred grove was a cathedral of ancient oaks, their branches heavy with silver lanterns. The air was thick with the cloying scents of jasmine, cedarwood, and the pheromones of dozens of anxious wolves. I stood at the very edge of the clearing, wearing a borrowed dress that was too short at the ankles, feeling the familiar sting of invisibility. Beside me stood Iris. She was the pack's jewel, golden-haired, smelling of wild honey, her wolf practically purring beneath her skin. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the dais at the end of the grove. Then, the world went silent. The Alpha King, Callum of the Northern Territories, did not just walk into the grove. He commanded the very air within it. He was a mountain of a man, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a kingdom. But it was his face that stopped my heart. He was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like a glacier. His hair was the color of a starless night, and his eyes, pale Arctic blue, swept over the crowd with a coldness that made the alphas of our pack bow their heads in instinctive submission. But as he sat upon the carved throne, I noticed the things others didn't. I saw the way his fingers gripped the armrest until his knuckles turned white. I saw the slight, rhythmic tremor in his jaw. and beneath the scent of ozone and ancient pine that radiated from him, there was something else. A scent of stone, of stagnant water, of a soul being slowly entombed. He was hurting. The ceremony began. One by one, alphas stepped forward to claim their prizes. Sarah was taken by a warrior from the east. Chloe was claimed by our own beta. With every union, the circle grew smaller, and the light in the grove seemed to dim for those of us left behind. Finally, it was the time for the prayer. This was the moment where the unclaimed Omegas stepped toward the sacred blue flame to offer a plea to the moon goddess. Usually, the girls spoke of their fertility, their beauty, or their devotion. Iris went first. "I offer my strength to a worthy alpha," she sang, her voice like a flute. "I offer a lineage of gold and power." Several alphas stirred, but the king remained motionless, his icy gaze fixed on something invisible. Then, it was my turn. A ripple of mocking laughter broke the silence as I stepped forward. I heard the whispers. "The kitchen ghost. Why does she even bother? The flame won't even flicker for a hollow." I stood before the silver basin. The blue fire danced in the wind, reflecting in the king's pale eyes. I forgot the script. I forgot the alphas watching me. I looked at the king, and for a fleeting second, I saw his mask slip. I saw a man drowning in a sea of stone, reaching for a hand that wasn't there. "I have no beauty to offer," I began, my voice small but clear. "I have no scent to draw a mate, and no wolf to run beside an alpha in the hunt." The elder stepped forward to silence me, but the king raised a hand. His gaze locked onto mine, intense and searching. "But," I continued, my voice gaining a strange, quiet strength, "I know what it is to be forgotten. I know how to find warmth in a cold room, and how to keep a fire burning when the wood is damp. I do not ask for a master. I ask only for the chance to belong, to be the shadow that stays when the light is too bright to bear." I reached into my heart, touching that tiny dormant spark of my wolf, and I let out a breath. As I did, a single tear, not of self-pity, but of genuine empathy for the lonely man on the throne, escaped and fell into the silver basin. The fire didn't just flicker, it roared. The blue flames turned a brilliant, blinding silver white, shooting toward the stars. The scent of wood smoke and winter lilies exploded through the grove, overriding every other smell. The ground beneath us hummed with a primal energy that brought every wolf in the clearing to their knees. I gasped, stumbling back, but I didn't fall. A hand, massive and searingly hot, caught my arm. I looked up. King Callum was standing right in front of me. He had moved with a speed that defied logic. His arctic eyes were no longer cold. They were burning with a desperate, terrifying hunger. "Your name," he rasped. His voice sounded like ice breaking over deep water. "Eleanor," I whispered. "Eleanor," he repeated, and the way he said it made my skin prickle. He turned to the shocked elder, his grip on my arm tightening, not to hurt me, but as if he were anchoring himself to the world. "The choosing is over," the king announced, his voice echoing like thunder through the trees. "I claim this Omega. She is mine." A collective gasp went up. Iris looked as if she had been struck. The elder stammered, "But, Your Majesty, she is defective. She cannot even shift. The bond will be weak. It will not sustain you." The king leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could see the faint, grayish lines of the curse creeping up his neck, hidden by his collar. He looked at me as if I were the only thing in the universe that mattered. "She is the only one who saw me," he whispered, so low only I could hear. Then he looked back at the crowd, his alpha aura flaring so brightly that even the lanterns dimmed. "She is not defective. She is the answer." He swept me into his arms, ignoring my small cry of surprise. As he carried me toward the royal carriage, away from the only home I had ever known, and toward a palace of shadows, I felt a strange, wild thrumming in my chest. For the first time in 22 years, my inner wolf didn't just sleep. She opened her eyes. The journey to the Northern Territories lasted 3 days, a blur of white-capped mountains and silent, pine-choked valleys. Inside the royal carriage, a vessel of obsidian wood and silver silk, the air was thick with a tension I couldn't name. Across from me sat the Alpha King, a man who had effectively bought my life with a single declaration. He didn't speak much. Most of the time he stared out the window, his profile as sharp and unyielding as the peaks we passed. But every time the carriage jolted over a mountain pass, I saw his jaw tighten. I saw his hand fly to his chest, clenching the heavy fabric of his tunic, as if he were trying to hold his very heart inside his body. "You are staring, Eleanor," he said on the second evening. He didn't turn his head, but his voice carried a weary weight. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," I whispered, pulling my furs tighter. I have never seen someone in so much pain who worked so hard to pretend they weren't." That made him turn. His arctic eyes searched mine, looking for mockery, but he found only the truth. In this palace, pain is a requirement for the crown. You would do well to learn that silence is the only medicine we recognize. "Silence doesn't heal," I ventured, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It only mutes the scream." A ghost of a shadow passed over his face, not quite a smile, but a softening. "Perhaps. But screams draw predators, and a king cannot afford to be prey. The Northern Palace, known in legends as the Eyrie of Shards, wasn't built upon the mountain. It was carved from it. As we pulled into the massive courtyard, the sheer scale of the stone spires took my breath away. It was a place of terrifying beauty, glowing like an amber coal in the dying twilight. But as the carriage door opened, the warmth of the interior was replaced by a chilling realization. Hundreds of eyes watched from the narrow windows. The royal household had gathered, not to welcome a queen, but to inspect the defective girl the king had plucked from the dirt. A tall woman with hair the color of steel stepped forward. This was Lady Helena, the royal steward. Her gaze was a physical weight, pressing down on my borrowed dress and messy hair. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice a perfect frozen chord. "The chambers are prepared, but we were not informed that the choosing would result in this. She is my guest, Helena, and eventually she will be more," Callum said, his voice dropping an octave into a warning growl. "Treat her as such." Helena bowed, though her eyes remained skeptical. She led me through corridors of white marble, where the statues seemed to watch my every step. "These are the royal suite's adjacent quarters," she explained, opening a set of double doors carved with wolves in mid-hunt. "They have not been inhabited for 200 years, not since the king's mother passed." The room was magnificent, filled with the scent of dried lilies and ancient parchment. But as Helena left, I felt the crushing weight of the silence. I was a kitchen maid in a fortress of legends. I walked to the window, looking out at the jagged horizon, and felt my wolf stir again. She wasn't afraid. She was restless, as if she recognized the very stone of the walls. That night, I couldn't sleep. The palace felt alive, whispering with the echoes of 3 centuries of secrets. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and stepped into the shared sitting room that connected my room to the king's. The door to his study was ajar. A low, rhythmic sound came from within, a sound of grinding stone and labored breathing. I should have turned back. My human instinct screamed for safety. But my wolf pushed me forward. I peered through the gap. Callum was slumped over a massive oak desk. His shirt was discarded, and in the dim light of a single candle, I saw the horror of his burden. Across his broad back and creeping up his shoulders, the skin was no longer flesh. It was gray, mottled, and cracked, resembling the very granite of the mountains. He was turning to stone. He let out a low, guttural groan, his fingers clawing at the desk. The beast the story spoke of wasn't a wolf. It was a literal petrification of his soul. Every year he went without a true mate. The curse pulled him closer to becoming a statue, a silent monument to his own isolation. Callum, I breathed, the name slipping out before I could stop it. He bolted upright, his eyes flashing a violent, luminescent blue. In a blur of movement, he was across the room, pinning me against the wall. His hand was near my throat, but it wasn't his strength that terrified me. It was the temperature of his skin. He was cold, deathly, unnaturally cold. "I told you," he hissed, his breath smelling of winter air and old magic. "Silence is the only medicine. Why are you here, Eleanor? Did you come to see the monster before it hardens completely?" I didn't pull away. I reached out, my trembling fingers hovering just inches from the gray, stony patches on his chest. "I came because I heard you, and because I know what it's like to feel your own body becoming a prison." His grip loosened. The blue fire in his eyes flickered, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability that made my chest ache. He looked at my hand, then at my face. "You don't even have a scent," he whispered, his forehead leaning against the wall beside my head. "You are a ghost, and I'm a statue. What a pair the moon has given us." "Maybe a ghost is the only one who can walk through stone walls," I said softly. For a long moment we stayed there, trapped in the orbit of each other's shadows. The king of the north, the most powerful alpha alive, was trembling against the shoulder of a girl who couldn't even shift. Then, he pulled back, his mask of granite snapping back into place. "Go back to your room, Eleanor. Tomorrow, the court will try to break you. And if I am too weak to protect you, you must be strong enough to survive them." "I survived 20 years of being nothing," I said, moving toward the door. "Being someone is much easier." As I closed the door, I heard a faint sound from his room, a sound I hadn't expected. It was the sound of a heavy chair being moved, and then the silence returned. But as I lay in my bed, I felt a strange warmth spreading through my limbs. My wolf was humming. A low, steady vibration that matched the heartbeat of the mountain itself. I realized then that the king hadn't chosen me because I was defective. He had chosen me because, in a world of vibrant colors and loud scents, I was the only one who could see the gray. But as the first light of dawn touched the peaks, a new shadow loomed. From the eastern wing, a horn sounded, a sharp, dissonant note that made the birds flee the battlements. Prince Damien had arrived, and unlike his brother, he didn't want to hide the curse. He wanted to watch it finish its work. Prince Damien did not enter a room. He invaded it. Where Callum was a mountain of granite and shadow, Damien was a flash of predatory gold. His hair was sunlight, his smile a serrated blade, and his scent, cloying, heavy honey, felt like a trap. He had arrived with a retinue of high-ranking alphas from the southern borders, men who looked at our palace with greedy eyes. The confrontation happened in the Great Hall during the welcoming feast, a tradition Callum clearly loathed. I sat beside the king on the high dais, encased in a dress of midnight blue that felt like armor. My hands were hidden in the folds of the silk, trembling. "So," Damien's voice carried across the silent hall as he lounged in a chair below us, swirling a goblet of dark wine. "The rumors were true. My brother, the Great Stone King, has finally found a mate, and he chose a kitchen mouse." A ripple of cruel laughter moved through the southern alphas. I felt Callum's aura flare, a cold, suffocating pressure that made the candles flicker. "She is the future queen, Damien," Callum said, his voice a low vibration that made the floorboards hum. "Mind your tongue, or I will remind you why you were banished to the border camps." Damien laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Callum, we all know why I was sent away. I saw the cracks in the statue before anyone else did. But this?" He stood up, walking toward the dais with a leisurely, terrifying grace. He stopped at the foot of the stairs and looked up at me. His eyes were the same pale blue as Callum's, but filled with a mocking light. "Tell me, little ghost," Damien purred. "What did you give him? What did a scentless, wolfless girl offer a king who has everything except a heartbeat? Was it pity? Or did you just happen to be the only girl desperate enough to stay in a room that smells like a tomb?" "Damien, enough," Lady Helena warned from the side, her face pale. But I found my voice. It wasn't the voice of a kitchen maid. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 20 years watching from the shadows, learning the shape of a person's soul by the way they moved when they thought no one was looking. "He chose me because I am not afraid of the silence, Prince Damien," I said, my voice steady. "And perhaps he chose me because, unlike you, I do not need to roar to prove I exist." The hall went deathly silent. Damien's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowing. Behind me, I felt Callum's hand twitch on the armrest. "A mouse with teeth," Damien whispered, a dangerous edge to his tone. "How charming. But let us see if those teeth hold up when the moon turns red. Brother, have you told her the truth yet? Have you told her about the 7 who came before her? The ones who loved you until they saw what happened to the things you touch?" "Silence," Callum roared. He stood up, and the force of his alpha command was so great that several goblets on the tables shattered. The gray stone on his neck seemed to darken, creeping further toward his cheek. Damien merely bowed, his golden hair falling over his eyes. "The blood moon is in 3 days, Callum. The clock is ticking. I wonder, will she stay when she realizes her tears of love are just water falling on a rock?" With a flourish of his cloak, Damien led his men from the hall, leaving a thick, suffocating air of doubt behind him. That night, the mistake I made was born of a desperate heart. I couldn't stand the look in Callum's eyes as he left the hall, a look of profound, hollow resignation. I went to the royal kitchens, searching for the herbs Malene had taught me about. Bitter root for pain, silver leaf for the spirit. I spent hours brewing a tonic, a small, humble offering. I thought if I could just ease his physical pain, I could reach the man inside. I brought the steaming cup to his study. He was sitting in the dark, his breath rattling in his chest. "I brought you something for the pain, Callum," I said softly, approaching the desk. He looked up, his eyes dull. "There is no cure for this, Eleanor. Only the end." "Please," I insisted, pushing the cup toward him. "It's what my mother used to make. It helps the spirit stay anchored to the body." He looked at the cup, then at me. In a moment of weakness, he reached out and took a sip. For a second, he seemed to relax. But then, he let out a strangled cry. He dropped the cup, the liquid spilling across the floor. He doubled over, his skin turning a violent, ashen gray right before my eyes. The stone crept across his hand, freezing his fingers into a claw. What did you do?" he gasped, his voice sounding like gravel rubbing together. I only wanted to help," I cried, reaching for him. "Stay back," he barked, a sound of pure agony. The magic of the curse. It reacts to hope. It reacts to anything that tries to soften the stone. Your kindness, it's making it worse. It's making it faster. I stood there, frozen in horror. My attempt to heal him had accelerated the petrification. I had tried to play the healer, but I was just a girl who didn't understand the depth of the darkness I was dealing with. "Leave me," he groaned, his head falling to the desk. "Go, Eleanor. Damien was right. I am a tomb, and I will not have you buried in me. Callum, please, I didn't know. Go." The roar was barely human. I ran through the cold marble halls until I found the servants' entrance to the gardens. I collapsed into the snow, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I had failed. I was the defective one, just as they said. I had tried to save a king and ended up pushing him closer to his grave. "He didn't tell you the whole story, did he?" I looked up. Lady Helena stood in the shadow of a stone archway. She looked older than she had this morning, her steel-gray hair wind-blown. "What story?" I wiped my eyes, my fingers numb with cold. "About the 7 Omegas," she whispered, stepping into the moonlight. "They didn't just leave, Eleanor. They tried to break the curse. They tried to give him their tears of love at the sacred pool. But the curse is a mirror. It only accepts what is real. 5 of them were seeking a crown, not a man. Their tears were just salt water. The pool rejected them, and the backlash, it broke their spirits. They didn't leave with wealth. They left as shells of people." She looked at me, her gaze piercing. "And the other 2, they did love him, but they feared him more. The moment his skin turned to stone under their touch, they flinched. They pulled away. And that flinch, that tiny bit of fear, it was enough to kill the magic." "I'm not afraid of him," I whispered. "No," Helena said softly. "But you are afraid of yourself. You are afraid that your nothingness makes you weak. But look at your hands, child." I looked down. Where I had touched Callum's arm earlier, my skin was glowing with a faint silver light. It wasn't the glow of an Omega in heat. It was something older. Something raw. "You aren't a hollow, Eleanor," Helena said, a tear finally escaping her own eye. "You are a vessel. You don't have a scent because you were meant to carry his. You don't have a wolf because you were meant to run with his. But if you don't find your strength before the blood moon rises in 48 hours, there won't be a king left to run with." I looked back at the high tower, where Callum's window glowed with a lonely, flickering light. The escalation had reached its peak. The prince was waiting to take the throne. The king was hardening into a statue, and I was the only thing standing between the mountain and the silence. But as I stood up, the silver light on my hands didn't fade. It grew. And deep within me, the wolf that had only just opened her eyes gave a low, rumbling growl of defiance. The silver light on my skin did not act as a beacon. It felt like a heavy, pulsing heartbeat that wasn't my own. Lady Helena's words echoed in the freezing garden air. "You are a vessel." I didn't return to my bed. The palace felt like a living entity now, its stone veins thrumming with the same rhythm as the silver runes on my hands. I found myself drawn back into the palace, not toward the great hall or the kitchens, but toward the oldest wing of the Eyrie, the part of the castle that seemed to disappear into the raw, uncarved granite of the mountain. My fingers went to the silver pendant at my throat. In the dim light of the corridor, the etched phases of the moon seemed to shift. I remembered the mysterious woman at the springs from the night of the choosing. She had called me by name. She had known my destiny. Remember, little one, even in darkness, the moon never truly disappears. I noticed a section of the wall near the royal library that felt different. The stone was smoother here, polished by centuries of unseen hands. As my hand, still glowing with that faint silver aura, brushed against a specific relief of a howling wolf, a mechanism groaned. A seam appeared in the rock. It didn't open like a door. It slid away like a heavy eyelid. Behind it lay a narrow staircase that spiraled down into the very gut of the mountain. The air that drifted up was ancient. It smelled of damp earth, cold mineral, and a sharp, metallic tang of old magic. I took a lantern from the wall and began the descent. The stairs ended in a vast, circular chamber. It was beautiful in a terrifying, primal way. Stalactites hung like frozen tears from the ceiling, and the walls were covered in murals that didn't look painted, but rather etched by lightning. In the center of the room sat a pool of water so still it looked like a sheet of black glass. I stepped closer, my lantern casting long, dancing shadows. This was it, the heart of the curse. Around the pool, the stone floor was stained with the residue of failed hopes, the salt of tears that had been rejected. I looked at the murals. They told the story of two brothers, a king of shadow and a prince of light. But as I traced the lines with my fingers, the revelation hit me like a physical blow. The story the world knew was a lie. Callum hadn't banished Damien because of a coup. He had banished him because Damien had struck a bargain with a witch of the void to siphon the king's life force into himself. The curse of stone wasn't just a punishment for Callum, it was a transfer. Every inch of Callum that turned to granite gave Damien another decade of youth, another layer of golden power. Callum had accepted the curse to protect the kingdom. If he had fought it, the magic would have exploded, shattering the mountain and everyone on it. He chose to be entombed in silence so his people could live in peace. He had spent 300 years becoming a statue so that his brother's darkness could be contained within a single, fading heart. You weren't supposed to find this? I whirled around. Callum stood at the base of the stairs. He looked devastating. The stone had moved further up his neck, now grazing his jawline. He leaned heavily against a pillar, his breathing a wet, rattling sound. Callum, I whispered, my heart breaking for the man who had carried this secret alone for centuries. You didn't tell me. You didn't tell me you were dying for them. A king's burden is his own, he rasped. Why are you here, Eleanor? I told you to leave. I can't leave, I said, stepping toward the black pool. I know what I am now. Helena told me. I'm a vessel. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. A vessel. It's a death sentence, Eleanor. Do you know why the others failed? It wasn't just that they didn't love me. It's that to break this curse, the vessel has to take a portion of the stone into themselves. You don't just heal me. You share the petrification. You would lose your freedom, your movement, perhaps your very life. I looked into the black water. My reflection looked back at me, a small, pale girl with a silver moon around her neck. Beside me, I saw the reflection of the king, a man turning into a monument of grief. All my life I was told I was nothing, I said, my voice echoing in the chamber. I was the forgotten Omega. I lived in the shadows because I thought I had no light of my own. But maybe I was kept empty so I would have the room to hold your pain, Callum. No, he growled, stepping forward, his movements stiff and agonizing. I will not let you wither for a ghost like me. It's not withering if it's for love, I countered. Love? He stopped, his arctic eyes wide and trembling. We have known each other for a handful of sunrises, Eleanor. You cannot love a monster you barely know. I don't love the king, I said, reaching out to touch his face. This time, I didn't flinch at the coldness of his skin. I leaned into it. I loved the man who stayed in the kitchen for 20 minutes just to watch me knead bread because he liked the sound of someone creating something. I loved the man who stared at my mother's pendant with respect instead of pity. I love the soul that is screaming behind this stone, and I am not leaving him behind. For a moment, the silence in the chamber was absolute. Then, a low, rumbling sound vibrated through the floor. The blood moon, Callum whispered, looking upward as if he could see through the miles of rock. It has begun. The moon is entering the shadow of the earth. Suddenly, the black pool began to churn. The silver runes on the floor glowed with a violent, angry light. Callum collapsed to his knees, his eyes rolling back as the stone surged. It raced across his chest, down his arms, encasing him in a gray shell. "Eleanor, run!" he choked out, his voice nearly gone. I didn't run. I stepped into the icy water of the pool. It felt like needles of frost piercing my skin. I reached for him, pulling his hardening body toward the edge of the water. "I choose this," I whispered, the silver light on my hands now blinding. "I choose you." But as I prepared to shed the tears that were supposed to save him, a shadow fell over the entrance of the chamber. A golden, mocking shadow. "A touching scene," Prince Damien said, stepping into the light, a wicked, obsidian blade in his hand. "But I think I've waited long enough for my brother to become a garden ornament. And I think I'll take that vessel for myself." I looked at the king, who was now 3/4 stone, and then at the prince, who had caused it all. My wolf, the one who had been waiting for someone to run with, didn't just growl this time. She screamed. The chamber, once a tomb of silence, became a theater of primal fury. Damien's transformation was a grotesque perversion of the sacred shift. He did not grow fur or bone through the moon's grace. He was consumed by the void. Shadows erupted from his pores like black oil, knitting together into a towering, skeletal wolf that stood 10 feet at the shoulder. His eyes were no longer Arctic blue, but pits of swirling, light-eating darkness. He was the embodiment of the greed that had nearly turned a kingdom to stone. Callum didn't flinch. He stood between me and the nightmare, his hand still gripping mine. The warmth of his skin was the most beautiful thing I had ever felt, a testament to the miracle we had just wrought. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice a steady anchor. "The vessel is full. Do you feel it?" I did. The nothingness that had defined my life for 22 years was gone. In its place was a sea of silver energy, a reservoir of ancestral strength that was finally finding its outlet. My mother's pendant was no longer just a piece of silver. It was a sun, pulsing in time with my heart. "I feel everything," I said. Damien's void wolf let out a sound that wasn't a howl. It was the sound of a vacuum, a scream of absolute hunger. He lunged, a blur of obsidian claws and jagged shadow teeth. Callum met him mid-air. The king's shift was unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't a sudden burst. It was like the mountain itself was rearranging its soul. His body expanded, his muscles rippling under skin that glowed with the amber light of the earth. When he landed, a massive, midnight black wolf stood where the man had been. But he wasn't just black. His fur was shot through with veins of gold, and his eyes were the color of the sun rising over an ice field. The two brothers, the Stonebreaker and the Shadow Eater, collided with the force of an avalanche. The chamber shook, stalactites shattered, falling like glass daggers. The black pool, now clear and sacred, rippled with the shockwaves of their power. Damien fought with the desperation of a man whose stolen life was slipping away, his claws leaving trails of corrosive rot in the air. Callum fought with the calm, relentless strength of the earth itself, shielding me even as he traded blows with a monster. But I realized, with the appearance of my own true power, that this wasn't a battle Callum could win alone. The void cannot be killed by strength. It can only be filled by light. I closed my eyes. I didn't reach for a wolf that didn't exist. I reached for the hollow and let the silver light of the pool, the blood moon, and my own selfless love overflow. "Mother," I whispered into the chaos, "I am ready." For the first time in my life, I felt the shift. It didn't hurt. It felt like shedding a heavy, dusty cloak. My bones didn't grind. They hummed. My skin didn't tear. It shimmered. I felt my perspective rise, my senses sharpening until I could hear the very heartbeat of the mountain. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't looking through human lashes. I was a wolf, but I was not the defective creature the pack had mocked. I was small, yes, but my fur was the color of a winter star, blindingly, impossibly white. A silver crescent moon was etched onto my brow, glowing with the same runes as the pendant. I was the Lunalith, the white wolf of the first queen, a guardian who had not appeared in the northern territories for a millennium. I let out a howl. It wasn't a cry of war. It was a note of pure, resonant harmony. The sound hit the void wolf like a physical wave. Damien's shadows flickered, his skeletal form losing its cohesion. He snarled, turning his light-eating eyes toward me, recognizing the threat. He abandoned Callum and charged at me, a maw of darkness intended to swallow the star. I didn't run. I stood my ground, my white fur radiating a silver aura that pushed back the dark. As Damien reached me, Callum, the great amber-eyed wolf, intercepted him from the side, pinning him to the stone floor. Callum looked at me, his soul speaking through the bond. Now, Eleanor, fill the void. I stepped forward, placing my white paw onto the swirling shadow of Damien's chest. I didn't bite. I didn't claw. I simply let the vessel open. The silver light poured out of me, a flood of empathy, history, and the quiet warmth of the kitchen fires. I gave him the memories of my mother's touch, the scent of fresh bread, the feeling of the moon on a quiet night, all the forgotten things that the Prince of Gold had traded for power. Damien's monster form began to dissolve. The shadows didn't fight, they simply ceased to be. The jagged teeth melted away, and the skeletal frame shrunk. The escalation of the fight ended not with a killing blow, but with a return to the truth. As the light subsided, Damien lay on the stone floor in his human form. He was no longer golden. He was aged, his hair white, his face etched with the hundreds of years he had stolen. He looked small, fragile, and utterly broken. The obsidian blade was gone, and with it, the bargain that had cursed a kingdom. Callum shifted back, pulling a discarded cloak around his shoulders. He looked down at his brother, his expression not filled with hatred, but with a profound, weary pity. "You chose the shadow, Damien," Callum said, his voice resonant and full. "But the shadow has no heart. It can only consume until there is nothing left." Damien looked up, his eyes dull and human once more. You chose a kitchen mouse, and she was a queen." "She was always a queen," Callum said, reaching out a hand to me. "I was just the first one who was quiet enough to hear her." I shifted back, the white fur receding into the simple midnight blue dress. I felt exhausted, my spirit drained, but the hollow feeling was gone forever. I was whole. Callum pulled me into his arms, his heartbeat strong and steady against mine. The stone was gone. The curse was broken. The mountain was silent. But it was a silence of peace, not of death. But as we stood there, the chamber began to hum with a new energy. The clear water of the pool began to rise, overflowing its banks, washing away the gray dust of the centuries. "The mountain is waking up," Lady Helena said, appearing at the top of the stairs, her eyes wet with tears. "The king has returned, and the moon has found its vessel." Callum looked at me, his Arctic eyes now filled with a warmth that could melt the entire north. "Is it over?" I whispered. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, his skin smelling of pine and promise. "No, Eleanor, it's finally, truly beginning." We turned to leave the chamber, leaving the broken prince to the mercy of the council. But as we reached the spiral stairs, I looked back at the pool. The reflection in the water wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a girl, standing tall beside her king, with a silver moon glowing at her throat. The appearance of our true selves had changed the world. But as we stepped out into the first light of a new dawn, I saw the palace guards bowing, not out of fear, but out of a sudden, overwhelming hope. The North was no longer a place of stone. It was a place of life. The morning that followed, the blood moon did not arrive with the usual harsh, biting chill of the mountains. Instead, the sun climbed over the jagged peaks of the Area of Shards with a peculiar golden tenderness. For 300 years, the Northern Palace had been a place of preservation, of ice, of stone, and of held breaths. But as Callum and I walked through the corridors toward the Great Hall, the very architecture seemed to be exhaling. Water dripped from the eaves as centuries-old ice finally succumbed to the warmth. In the courtyard, patches of green moss and tiny, resilient alpine flowers, purple saxifrage and silverleaf, pushed through the softening frost. The curse hadn't just affected the king, it had held the land in a state of stasis. Now, the North was waking up. We entered the Great Hall, which was no longer a cavern of shadows. The tall windows had been cleaned of grime, letting in shafts of light that danced with dust motes. The members of the court, the warriors, and the servants were all there. They didn't stand in rigid, fearful lines. They hovered, whispering, their eyes wide as they saw their king. Callum walked without the rattle of stone in his chest. He moved with the fluid, predator grace of a wolf who had reclaimed his territory. His hand never left mine, his fingers interlaced with mine in a quiet, public vow. Lady Helena stood at the foot of the dais. She had replaced her stiff, steel-gray robes with a gown of soft wool. When she looked at us, her face broke into a smile that took years off her age. "The council has reached a decision regarding Prince Damien," she announced, her voice echoing through the hall. I felt Callum's grip tighten slightly. The redemption of this story wasn't in more blood, but in the restoration of justice. "He will be sent to the borderlands," Callum said, his voice ringing with a new, compassionate authority. "But not as a prisoner. He will live among the forgotten ones, the Omegas and Alphas we once cast aside for being defective. He will learn to build, to need, and to serve without the crutch of stolen power. If he finds his heart there, the North will welcome him back. Until then, he will learn the value of the lives he tried to siphon." A murmur of approval rippled through the hall. It was a morally redeeming sentence. It turned a place of exile into a place of growth. "And as for the law of the choosing," Callum continued, looking at me with an intensity that made my heart swell. "There will be no more borderlands. No wolf is hollow. No soul is defective. From this day forward, the Northern Territories will be a sanctuary for those who have been told they have no scent. We are a pack of the whole, not of the perfect." The roar that went up then was not the submissive howl of a frightened pack. It was a cheer of a liberated people. In the weeks that followed, the palace transformed. I didn't spend my days draped in jewels, though Callum would have given them to me. I spent them in the gardens and the new infirmaries, working alongside Mira and Daria. We turned the Area of Shards into the Area of Healing. Malene was brought from the Silver Moon Pack. When she saw me, no longer the flower-dusted girl hiding in the shadows, but a white wolf who walked beside a king, she wept into her apron. "I told you the moon never disappears, Ellie," she whispered, as we stood on the battlements, watching the first true spring the North had seen in centuries. "You were right," I said, leaning my head against her shoulder. It was just waiting for the sky to clear. That evening, Callum found me in our shared sitting room. He had been in meetings all day, but as soon as he saw me, the weariness left his face. He sat beside me on the velvet sofa, pulling me into the crook of his arm. The scent of pine and heat that radiated from him was my favorite anchor. "You're thinking again," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of the silver crescent on my brow, which only appeared now when I was truly at peace. "I was just thinking about the forgotten Omega," I said softly. "I wonder if she ever imagined she'd have a king who likes sourdough bread as much as she does." Callum laughed, a deep, rich sound that vibrated in his chest. "I think the king was the one who was forgotten, Eleanor, until a girl with no scent brought him back to life with a single tear." He turned to me, his Arctic eyes now a soft, clear blue. "I love you, Eleanor. Not as a vessel, not as a queen, but as the only person who stayed when the stone was too cold to touch." "And I love you," I replied, "not as an alpha, but as the man who was brave enough to be vulnerable." We stood up and walked out onto the stone balcony. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in hues of violet, rose, and gold. Below us, the palace lights were coming on, one by one, not as cold sentinels, but as warm invitations. The blood moon was a memory. The curse was a shadow that had been chased away by the dawn. Callum pulled a soft, white fur around my shoulders, and we stood there in the quiet. The only sound was the distant howl of a wolf in the forest, a song of belonging echoing through the pines. There was no more fear. There was only the steady, rhythmic breathing of a land that was finally, truly alive. I reached for his hand, and he held mine. We looked out over our kingdom, not a kingdom of stone, but a kingdom of hearts. The healing had begun, and as the first star of the evening appeared in the velvet sky, I knew that the silence of the north would never be lonely again. The ice has finally melted, and the north is silent once more, not with the coldness of stone, but with the peace of a new beginning. Eleanor and Callum's journey reminds us that even when the world labels you nothing, you might just be the one destined to save everything. If this cinematic tale of redemption and the power of a single tear moved you, please give this video a like and share it with those who believe in the magic of being truly seen. Subscribe to join our pack of storytellers as we explore more worlds of heart and shadow. Thank you for being part of this journey. Remember, even in the deepest darkness, your light is never truly gone. The camera pans slowly away from the palace balcony, where two silhouettes stand hand in hand against the violet dusk. Below them, a single white flower blooms in a crack in the castle wall, swaying gently in a warm spring breeze. The screen fades to a soft, warm white,